Miguel stared at the massive horse collapsed on the stable floor, the same animal that had defeated every veterinarian the millionaire's fortune could buy. At 10 years old, with nothing but a handful of dried herbs and 3 days of walking behind him, he was about to attempt what dozens of experts had declared impossible. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Hacienda del Sol was known throughout the region as one of the most magnificent estates in all of Mexico. Its sprawling grounds stretched across hundreds of acres of lush pastures, and its main house, a colonial masterpiece with terracotta roofs and marble columns, stood as a testament to the immense wealth of its owner. Don Ricardo Mendoza had built his fortune through decades of shrewd business dealings, real estate investments, and cattle ranching. He was a man who had everything money could buy, from luxury cars to priceless artwork. But there was one possession he valued above all others, one treasure that no amount of gold could ever replace. His name was Titan. Titan was no ordinary horse. Standing at nearly 19 hands tall, he was the largest draft horse anyone in the region had ever seen. A magnificent creature whose chestnut coat gleamed like polished copper under the Mexican sun. His lineage traced back to European champions, and Don Ricardo had paid a fortune to bring him across the ocean when he was just a foal. Over the years, Titan had grown into something legendary, a gentle giant whose presence commanded respect and admiration from everyone who laid eyes upon him. The horse had won countless exhibitions and had become the symbol of Don Ricardo's success, appearing in newspapers and magazines as the crown jewel of Hacienda del Sol. But Titan was more than a symbol to Don Ricardo. In truth, the massive horse had become the millionaire's closest companion. After his wife passed away 5 years ago, Don Ricardo found himself increasingly isolated despite his wealth. His children lived abroad and rarely visited, and the servants, though loyal, maintained a respectful distance. It was Titan who filled the void in his heart. Every morning, Don Ricardo would walk to the stables before dawn, bringing carrots and sugar cubes, speaking to Titan as if the horse could understand every word. And perhaps he could, for Titan would nuzzle against the old man's shoulder and stand patiently as Don Ricardo shared his thoughts, his worries, his memories of better days. That was why, when Titan fell ill, Don Ricardo's world began to crumble. It started subtly, so subtly that even the experienced stable hands almost missed it. Titan began refusing his morning feed, turning his massive head away from the grain that he usually devoured with enthusiasm. Then came the lethargy, a heaviness in his movements that seemed to drain the life from his powerful legs. Within a week, the giant horse could barely stand, and when he finally collapsed onto the ground of the main corral, refusing to rise no matter how much his handlers coaxed him, panic spread through the entire hacienda like wildfire. Don Ricardo summoned every veterinarian in the region. They came from nearby towns and distant cities, specialists who charged enormous fees and arrived with confident promises. One by one they examined Titan, taking blood samples, running tests, consulting thick medical textbooks. But one by one they left with the same defeated expressions, unable to diagnose what was slowly stealing the life from the magnificent creature. Some suggested it might be a rare infection. Others theorized it could be a degenerative condition affecting his nervous system. A few whispered that perhaps the horse was simply too old, too tired to continue, though Titan was barely 15 years old, well within his prime. None of their treatments worked. The medications they prescribed, the therapies they recommended, the surgeries they proposed, all failed to produce any improvement. Titan continued to waste away, his once powerful body growing thinner by the day, his eyes losing the spark that had once reflected such intelligence and spirit. Don Ricardo spent his nights in the stable, sleeping on a cot beside his beloved horse, holding on to hope that morning would bring some miracle. Desperate and running out of options, Don Ricardo made a decision that would soon spread across the entire country. He summoned reporters to his hacienda, and standing before the cameras with tears threatening to spill from his weathered eyes, he made an announcement that left everyone speechless. He was offering $500,000 to anyone, absolutely anyone, who could cure his horse. It did not matter if they were a licensed veterinarian or a traditional healer, a scientist, or a farmer. If they could save Titan, the money was theirs, no questions asked. The news spread like wildfire. Within days, people began arriving at Hacienda del Sol from every corner of the country. There were veterinarians seeking to make a name for themselves, herbalists carrying bundles of mysterious plants, and charlatans hoping to trick the grieving millionaire out of his money. Don Ricardo received them all, allowing each one a chance to examine Titan, clinging to the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, held the key to saving his friend. But day after day, attempt after attempt, nothing changed. Titan remained on the ground, too weak to stand, his breathing growing shallower with each passing hour. The workers at the hacienda began to whisper among themselves that it was hopeless, that the great horse would soon be gone, and that Don Ricardo would never recover from the loss. They watched their employer grow thinner and paler, aged by grief and sleepless nights. Some said the millionaire had already begun planning the burial, ordering a special plot to be prepared in the most beautiful corner of the estate, where Titan could rest beneath the shade of ancient oak trees. It was on the 12th day after the announcement, when even Don Ricardo had begun to lose faith, that something unexpected happened. A small figure appeared at the gates of Hacienda del Sol, a boy no older than 10 years, dressed in clothes that had seen better days, with patches on his trousers and sandals worn thin from miles of walking. His dark hair was dusty from the road, and his face bore the marks of poverty, but his eyes held something remarkable, a quiet confidence that seemed entirely out of place for someone so young. The guards at the gate looked at him and almost laughed. What could a child possibly do that the best veterinarians in the country had failed to accomplish? But when the boy spoke, his voice clear and steady despite his small stature, something in his words made them pause. He said he had come to heal the giant horse, and he would not leave until he had tried. The boy's name was Miguel, and his journey to Hacienda del Sol had begun 3 days earlier in a small village nestled in the mountains, a place so remote that it did not appear on most maps. He lived there with his grandmother, Elena, in a humble adobe house with a roof that leaked when the rains came and walls that let in the cold during the winter nights. His parents had passed away when he was only 4 years old, victims of a fever that had swept through the village and taken many lives. Since then, his grandmother had raised him alone, teaching him everything she knew about the natural world, about the plants that grew in the forests, and the ancient remedies that had been passed down through generations of their family. Elena was known throughout the mountain villages as a healer, though she never called herself that. She simply said she listened to the earth and paid attention to what it had to teach. People would travel for hours to seek her help when their animals fell sick, or when conventional medicine failed them. She had no formal education, no certificates hanging on her walls, but she possessed a wisdom that came from decades of observation and practice. And from the moment Miguel could walk, he had followed her everywhere, watching her work, learning her methods, absorbing knowledge like a sponge absorbs water. It was Elena who first heard about Don Ricardo's offer on the old radio that sat in the corner of their kitchen. The static-filled broadcast described the millionaire's desperate plea, the massive horse that lay dying, and the fortune being offered to anyone who could save him. Miguel had been grinding herbs at the table when the announcement came, and something in the story made him stop his work and listen intently. When the broadcast ended, he turned to his grandmother with a look she had never seen before, a mixture of determination and certainty that seemed far beyond his years. He told her he needed to go. He did not know how to explain it, but something deep inside him insisted that he was meant to help that horse. Elena studied her grandson for a long moment, seeing in his eyes the same gift she had recognized years ago, an intuition for understanding animals that went beyond anything she could teach. She had watched him calm frightened dogs with just a touch, had seen him nurse injured birds back to health when others would have been given up. There was something special about the boy, something she had always known but never fully understood. Against every practical instinct that told her a child should not travel alone across the country, Elena gave Miguel her blessing. She packed a small bag with food for the journey and gathered the herbs and remedies she thought might be useful. She pressed a few worn coins into his palm, all she had saved over months of work, and she told him to trust what he felt, to listen not just with his ears, but with his heart. Then she watched him walk away down the dusty mountain path, her own heart heavy with worry, but also filled with a strange sense of pride. The journey had been long and difficult. Miguel had walked when he could not find rides, had slept under bridges and in the doorways of churches, had gone hungry when his food ran out, but he never once considered turning back. With every step that brought him closer to Hacienda del Sol, the feeling inside him grew stronger, a certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. And now, standing before the imposing gates of the Millionaire's estate, facing the skeptical stares of guards twice his size, he felt no fear at all. The guards exchanged glances, unsure of what to do with the persistent child before them. They had turned away dozens of people over the past days, con artists and fools who had wasted Don Ricardo's time with false promises. But there was something about this boy, something in the way he stood his ground without aggression or pleading, that made them hesitate. Finally, one of them shrugged and went to inform the household, more out of curiosity than any belief that the child could help. Word of the boy's arrival reached Don Ricardo in the stable, where he sat beside Titan, holding the horse's massive head in his lap. The millionaire had not slept in days, and his eyes were red from exhaustion and unshed tears. When his servant told him about the child at the gate, claiming he could heal the horse, Don Ricardo almost dismissed it entirely. What could a 10-year-old boy possibly know that trained veterinarians did not? But then he remembered his own words, his promise that anyone could try, and he realized that if he turned the boy away, he would be breaking that promise. Besides, he thought bitterly, what did he have left to lose? He ordered the guards to bring the boy to the stable. When Miguel finally stood before the fallen giant, he felt his breath catch in his throat. Titan was even larger than he had imagined, a mountain of muscle and bone that now lay motionless on the stable floor. The horse's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow and labored, and even from a distance Miguel could sense the profound exhaustion that had settled into every fiber of the animal's being. Around them stood workers and servants, their faces a mixture of pity and skepticism as they watched the small boy approach. Don Ricardo studied Miguel with tired eyes. The millionaire saw the patched clothes, the worn sandals, the dust of the road still clinging to the boy's dark hair. He saw poverty and youth, everything that suggested this child had no business being here. But he also saw something else, a steadiness in the boy's gaze that surprised him, a calm that seemed entirely inappropriate for someone facing such an impossible task. "You understand that many have tried and failed," Don Ricardo said, his voice hoarse from days of grief. "Doctors and specialists from across the country have examined him. What makes you think you can do what they could not?" Miguel looked at the millionaire, then turned his attention back to Titan. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the horse, his small feet making barely any sound on the stable floor. When he reached Titan's side, he knelt down and placed his hand gently on the horse's neck, closing his eyes as if listening to something only he could hear. "I do not know if I can save him," Miguel finally said, his voice soft but clear, "but I know I have to try." The stable fell silent as Miguel knelt beside the massive horse, his small hand resting against Titan's neck. The workers and servants who had gathered to watch exchanged glances, some smirking at the absurdity of the scene before them, others simply curious to see what the boy would do. Don Ricardo stood a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, his weathered face betraying the conflict between desperate hope and rational doubt. He had seen so many people fail over the past weeks that he had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Miguel paid no attention to the eyes upon him. His entire focus was on Titan, on the rhythm of the horse's breathing, on the temperature of his skin, on the subtle tremors that ran through his massive body. He moved his hand slowly along the horse's neck, then down to his shoulder, his touch light but deliberate. His grandmother had taught him that every creature speaks its own language, a language of movement and stillness, of tension and release, of warmth and cold. To understand what ailed an animal, you first had to learn to listen. For several long minutes, Miguel simply observed. He noticed how Titan's muscles twitched involuntarily beneath his coat, how the horse's eyes flickered with discomfort, even in his semi-conscious state. He saw the way Titan's legs were positioned, drawn slightly toward his belly, as if protecting something within. He smelled the faint sourness on the horse's breath, a scent that reminded him of something his grandmother had once described. Slowly, like pieces of a puzzle coming together, a picture began to form in Miguel's mind. He leaned closer to Titan's head, placing his ear near the horse's barrel chest, listening to the sounds within. The workers murmured among themselves, wondering what the boy could possibly hear that sophisticated medical equipment had missed. But Miguel was not listening for what machines could detect. He was listening for something else entirely, something that required patience and intuition rather than technology. After what felt like an eternity, Miguel stood up and turned to face Don Ricardo. The millionaire raised an eyebrow, waiting for the boy to speak, expecting perhaps another vague promise or mystical explanation like so many others had offered. But when Miguel spoke, his words were surprisingly practical. "Has anyone checked what Titan has been eating?" Miguel asked. "Not just his regular feed, but everything. The grass in his pasture, the water in his trough, anything he might have found and eaten on his own." Don Ricardo frowned. "Of course we have. The veterinarians tested his food and water for contamination. Everything came back clean." Miguel shook his head slowly. "I do not mean poison or contamination. I mean something natural, something that grows in the fields that a horse might eat without anyone noticing. Something that looks harmless but is not." The millionaire's frown deepened, but before he could respond, one of the stable hands stepped forward. It was an older man named Joaquin, who had worked at the hacienda for over 30 years and had cared for Titan since the horse first arrived from Europe. His face was creased with worry and lack of sleep, and his voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "There is something," Joaquin said hesitantly. "About 3 weeks ago, before Titan got sick, we moved him to the north pasture while we repaired the fencing in his usual field. The north pasture has not been used in years. There are plants growing there that I did not recognize, weeds that came up after the heavy rains last season." Don Ricardo turned to his servant with barely contained frustration. "Why did no one mention this before? Did the veterinarians not ask about where he had been grazing?" Joaquin lowered his head. "They asked about his diet, Patron. They tested his grain and hay, but they never asked about the pasture itself. And I did not think to mention it because the plants did not seem dangerous. They were just weeds with small yellow flowers. The cattle in the neighboring ranch have eaten them without any problems." Miguel's eyes lit up with recognition. Yellow flowers? Small ones, growing close to the ground, with leaves that look like little hands. Joaquin looked at the boy with surprise. "Yes, exactly like that. How did you know?" "Because I have seen horses react to that plant before," Miguel explained, turning back to look at Titan. "In my village, we call it dormilona because it makes horses sleep and sleep until they cannot wake up. It does not hurt cows or goats, only horses. It builds up slowly in their bodies over days and weeks until they become too weak to stand. The veterinarians would not find it in tests because it is not a poison in the way they understand. It is more like a heavy blanket that smothers the horse's energy little by little." Don Ricardo stared at the boy, his skepticism warring with a desperate need to believe. "You are saying that a common weed has done this to my horse? That all the experts who came here missed something so simple?" Miguel met the millionaire's gaze without flinching. Sometimes the simplest things are the easiest to overlook. People expect illness to be complicated, so they look for complicated answers. But nature does not always work that way. The stable fell silent again, but this time the quality of the silence had changed. Where before there had been doubt and dismissal, now there was something else, a cautious, trembling hope that perhaps this child saw something that everyone else had missed. Don Ricardo walked over to the window of the stable and looked out toward the north pasture, where indeed he could see patches of small yellow flowers dotting the grass. "Even if you are right," Don Ricardo said slowly, turning back to face Miguel, "knowing what caused this does not tell us how to fix it. How do you cure something like this? Is there an antidote?" Miguel knelt back down beside Titan, placing his hand once again on the horse's neck. "There is no antidote," he admitted. "But there is a way to help his body fight it off, to wake him up from the inside. My grandmother taught me how to make a remedy from mountain herbs that can strengthen a horse's spirit and help push out the Dormillona's effects. I brought the herbs with me from my village. He reached into his small bag and pulled out several bundles of dried plants, each one carefully wrapped in cloth. The workers leaned in to look, seeing nothing particularly impressive, just leaves and roots that could have come from any garden. "This will take time," Miguel continued, "many days, maybe weeks, and I cannot promise it will work, but if you let me try, if you trust me, I believe Titan can recover." Don Ricardo looked at the boy, at the herbs in his hands, at the massive horse lying motionless on the stable floor. Everything logical told him this was foolish, that he was grasping at straws offered by a child who could not possibly understand what he was dealing with. But somewhere deep inside, in a place beyond logic and reason, something told him to trust. "Do whatever you need to do," the millionaire said quietly. "I will give you everything you require." Miguel began his work that very evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple over the mountains surrounding Hacienda del Sol. Don Ricardo had ordered his servants to give the boy whatever he needed, and though many of them still harbored doubts about the child's abilities, they followed their employer's instructions without question. A small cot was set up in the corner of the stable, so Miguel could stay close to Titan day and night. Fresh water was brought in clean buckets, and a table was cleared for the boy to prepare his remedies. The first thing Miguel did was examine his herbs carefully, laying them out on the table and inspecting each bundle to ensure they had survived the long journey from his village. There were dried leaves of a plant his grandmother called Yerba del Alma, which was said to restore vitality to weakened creatures. There were roots of a mountain flower that grew only at high altitudes, known for its ability to cleanse impurities from the blood. And there was a small pouch of seeds from a rare vine that Elena had gathered years ago and kept for emergencies. Seeds that had to be ground into powder and mixed with honey to create a paste that could penetrate even the deepest sickness. The workers watched with fascination as Miguel worked with the confidence and precision of someone far beyond his years. His small hands moved deftly, grinding herbs with a stone pestle he had brought from home, measuring portions by instinct rather than calculation, mixing ingredients in combinations that followed no recipe anyone present had ever seen. When asked what he was making, Miguel simply explained that he was preparing medicine for Titan's spirit as much as his body, a concept that made little sense to the practical-minded ranch hands, but which they accepted without argument. By midnight, Miguel had prepared the first dose of his remedy, a thick brownish liquid that smelled strongly of earth and something sweetly bitter. The challenge now was getting Titan to consume it. The great horse had not eaten or drunk anything willingly in days, and his jaw muscles had grown weak from disuse. Miguel knew that forcing the medicine down Titan's throat would only cause distress and potentially make things worse. He needed the horse to accept the remedy on his own terms. Miguel approached Titan slowly, carrying a small bowl containing the liquid. He knelt beside the horse's massive head and began to speak softly, words that no one else could quite hear, a gentle murmuring that seemed almost like a lullaby. He placed his free hand on Titan's forehead, stroking the space between his eyes with a tender rhythm. The workers watching from the doorway held their breath, certain that the stubborn horse would refuse whatever the boy offered. But something remarkable happened. As Miguel continued his soft murmuring, Titan's eyes opened slightly, focusing on the small figure beside him. There was a flicker of something in those dark depths, perhaps curiosity, perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit. When Miguel brought the bowl to Titan's lips, the horse did not turn away. Instead, slowly and with great effort, Titan extended his tongue and began to lap at the liquid, taking small sips that gradually emptied the bowl. A quiet gasp rippled through the watching workers. Joaquin, the old stable hand, crossed himself and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Even Don Ricardo, who had been standing in the shadows observing everything, felt his heart skip a beat. It was such a small thing, a sick horse drinking from a bowl, but after days of watching Titan refuse all nourishment, it felt like witnessing a miracle. Miguel did not celebrate or show any sign of triumph. He simply nodded to himself as if this outcome had been expected, and began preparing for the next phase of his treatment. He explained to Don Ricardo that the medicine would need to be given 3 times daily, morning, afternoon, and night, and that the mixture would change slightly each time as different herbs were added or removed depending on how Titan responded. It was not a simple cure that would work overnight, Miguel warned. It was a process, a conversation between the remedy and the sickness, and patience would be essential. The first few days were the hardest. Titan showed little improvement, and there were moments when his condition seemed to worsen. His breathing would become rapid and shallow. His body would tremble with fever, and more than once Don Ricardo feared that each night would be the horse's last. But Miguel never wavered in his dedication. He stayed by Titan's side constantly, sleeping only in brief intervals, adjusting his remedies based on subtle changes that only he seemed to notice. When others expressed doubt or suggested that perhaps it was time to let the horse go peacefully, Miguel would simply shake his head and continue his work. On the 4th day, something changed. Miguel arrived at the stable before dawn as usual, carrying the morning dose of medicine, and found Titan with his head slightly raised, his eyes more alert than they had been since the illness began. The horse watched Miguel approach with what could only be described as recognition, and when the boy knelt beside him, Titan made a soft sound, a weak nicker that had not been heard in weeks. The workers who witnessed it felt tears spring to their eyes, hardened men who had worked with animals their entire lives and thought they had seen everything. Don Ricardo, who had barely left the stable since Miguel's arrival, allowed himself to feel something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope, real and tangible, blooming in his chest like a flower after rain. He watched the boy work with a growing sense of wonder, marveling at how someone so young could possess such skill and dedication. There was no arrogance in Miguel, no desire for praise or recognition. He simply did what needed to be done, treating Titan's illness as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As the days passed, word began to spread among the hacienda's workers that something extraordinary was happening in the stable. People found excuses to walk past, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boy and the giant horse. They saw Miguel talking to Titan for hours, saw him massaging the horse's legs to keep the blood flowing, saw him lying beside the massive creature at night, sharing warmth and comfort. A bond was forming between them, visible to anyone who cared to look, a connection that transcended the simple relationship between healer and patient. By the end of the first week, Titan attempted to stand for the first time in nearly a month. The moment Titan tried to rise, every person in the stable froze. It was early morning, the golden light of dawn streaming through the wooden slats of the stable walls, casting long shadows across the hay-covered floor. Miguel had just finished administering the morning dose of medicine when he noticed a change in Titan's posture. The horse's muscles were tensing, his front legs shifting position, his massive body gathering strength for an effort that seemed almost impossible given his weakened state. Miguel quickly stepped back, giving Titan space, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. He knew this moment was critical. If Titan tried to stand and failed, the disappointment could set back his recovery significantly. Animals, like people, could lose hope, and once hope was lost, even the best medicine in the world might not be enough to save them. But Miguel also knew that he could not stop Titan from trying. The will to rise had to come from within the horse himself. Titan's front legs extended, pressing against the stable floor with trembling effort. His neck strained, muscles rippling beneath his chestnut coat as he lifted his head and shoulders from the ground. The workers watching held their breath, some of them unconsciously leaning forward as if their own bodies could lend strength to the struggling animal. For a moment, it seemed like Titan might actually make it, might defy all expectations and rise to his full magnificent height. But his back legs would not cooperate. They remained folded beneath him, too weak to support the enormous weight of his body. With a heavy sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Titan lowered himself back down to the ground, his head dropping onto the hay with an expression of exhaustion and frustration. A collective murmur of disappointment rippled through the stable, and more than one worker turned away, unable to watch anymore. Miguel, however, did not look disappointed. Instead, a small smile crossed his face as he knelt beside Titan and stroked the horse's neck with gentle reassurance. "You did well," he whispered. "You tried, and that is what matters. Tomorrow you will try again, and you will be stronger. The day after that, stronger still. We are not in a hurry, my friend. We have all the time in the world." Don Ricardo approached, his face a map of conflicting emotions. He had allowed himself to hope when he saw Titan moving, and now that hope felt fragile, threatened by the reality of how far the horse still had to go. "Is this normal?" he asked Miguel, his voice rough with worry. "Should he be trying to stand so soon? What if he hurts himself?" Miguel looked up at the millionaire with calm, steady eyes. "It is good that he wants to stand. It means his spirit is returning. The body will follow when it is ready. We cannot rush this, but we also cannot hold him back. Titan knows what he needs to do. Our job is to support him while he does it." Over the following days, Miguel implemented a new phase of his treatment. In addition to the herbal remedies, he began a regimen of gentle physical therapy, something he had learned from watching his grandmother work with injured animals in their village. He would spend hours massaging Titan's legs, working out the stiffness that had accumulated during weeks of immobility. He would move the horse's joints through their full range of motion, keeping the muscles and tendons from atrophying completely. And he would talk to Titan constantly, a steady stream of encouragement and companionship that seemed to nourish the horse's soul as much as the medicine nourished his body. The bond between the boy and the horse deepened with each passing day. Titan, who had always been somewhat aloof with the stable hands, began to show clear signs of attachment to Miguel. His ears would perk up when the boy entered the stable, and he would make soft, welcoming sounds that he reserved for no one else. When Miguel sat beside him during the long afternoon hours, reading aloud from old newspapers he found in the servants' quarters, Titan would rest his massive head in the boy's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. The workers marveled at the sight, this small child and this enormous horse, connected by something invisible but undeniably real. Don Ricardo found himself spending more and more time in the stable, not just to check on Titan's progress, but to observe Miguel. The millionaire had built his fortune by understanding people, by recognizing talent and potential where others saw nothing remarkable. And in Miguel, he saw something extraordinary, a wisdom and compassion that seemed impossible for someone so young. He began asking the boy questions about his life, about his village, about the grandmother who had taught him so much, and Miguel, who was not accustomed to adults taking genuine interest in him, answered openly and honestly. He told Don Ricardo about his parents, about the fever that had taken them when he was barely old enough to remember their faces. He told him about growing up in poverty, about nights when there was not enough food and mornings when the cold seeped through the walls of their little house. But he also told him about the beauty of the mountains, about the kindness of the villagers who helped his grandmother raise him, about the joy he found in working with the animals and watching them recover under his care. There was no self-pity in Miguel's stories, no bitterness about the hardships he had faced. He spoke of his life with a simple acceptance that touched Don Ricardo deeply. One evening, as the sun set over the hacienda and the stable was bathed in warm golden light, Don Ricardo sat beside Miguel and watched Titan sleep. The horse's breathing was stronger now, more regular, and there was color returning to his coat that had been absent for weeks. The millionaire turned to the boy and asked a question that had been forming in his mind for days. "What will you do when this is over?" he asked. "When Titan is well and you have collected the reward, will you return to your village?" Miguel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. He had not thought much about the future since arriving at the hacienda. His entire focus had been on the present, on the task of healing Titan. The reward money, which had seemed like such an impossible fortune when he first heard about it on the radio, had faded to insignificance compared to the work itself. "I will go back to my grandmother," Miguel finally answered. "She will be worried about me. And there are others who need help, other animals in the villages who are sick or hurt. The money will help us buy better supplies, better medicine. We can do more good with it than we ever could before." Don Ricardo nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he was thinking about more than just the reward. 2 weeks had passed since Miguel's arrival at Hacienda del Sol, and the transformation in Titan was nothing short of remarkable. The horse that had lain motionless on the stable floor, barely clinging to life, was now attempting to stand multiple times each day. His appetite had returned with vigor, and he eagerly consumed not only Miguel's herbal remedies, but also the grain and hay that he had refused for so long. His coat, once dull and lifeless, had begun to regain its lustrous copper sheen, and his eyes sparkled with an intelligence and vitality that had brought tears of joy to those who had feared they would never see it again. But progress was not without its setbacks. On the 15th day, just when everyone had begun to believe that the worst was behind them, Titan developed a high fever that sent the entire household into panic. Miguel awoke in the middle of the night to find the horse drenched in sweat, his body trembling violently, his breathing rapid and shallow. The boy's heart clenched with fear, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would not help Titan. Only clear thinking and steady action could see them through this crisis. Miguel worked through the night, adjusting his remedies to address the fever while maintaining the treatment for the underlying illness. He applied cool compresses to Titan's neck and forehead, changing them every few minutes as they absorbed the heat radiating from the horse's body. He prepared a special tea from herbs his grandmother used for fevers in humans, adapting the recipe for a creature of Titan's enormous size. And he talked to the horse constantly, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of sickness that threatened to overwhelm them both. Don Ricardo stayed in the stable throughout the night, refusing all suggestions that he rest. He watched Miguel work with growing admiration, marveling at the boy's composure under pressure. The millionaire had seen grown men crumble in situations far less dire than this, yet here was a 10-year-old child facing the potential death of his patient with the calm determination of a seasoned professional. More than once during that long night, Don Ricardo found himself wondering what kind of life had forged such strength in someone so young. By dawn, the fever had broken. Titan's body temperature returned to normal, and his trembling subsided into peaceful sleep. Miguel, exhausted beyond measure, finally allowed himself to collapse onto his cot, falling into a deep slumber that lasted well into the afternoon. When he awoke, he found Don Ricardo sitting beside him, watching over him just as Miguel had watched over Titan for so many nights. "You saved him again," the millionaire said quietly. "When I saw that fever, I thought we had lost him for certain. But you knew exactly what to do. How is that possible for someone your age?" Miguel sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "My grandmother says that healing is not about age or education. It is about paying attention and caring enough to act on what you see. She also says that fear is the enemy of healing, that when we let fear control us, we cannot think clearly enough to help anyone. I was afraid last night, very afraid. But I did not let the fear make my decisions for me." Don Ricardo shook his head in wonder. "Your grandmother sounds like an extraordinary woman. I would very much like to meet her someday." "She would like that," Miguel said with a small smile. "She has never left the mountains, never seen a hacienda like this one. She would probably think she had stepped into a fairy tale." The crisis of the fever, though terrifying, proved to be a turning point in Titan's recovery. It was as if the horse's body had needed one final battle to purge the last remnants of the illness from his system. In the days that followed, his improvement accelerated dramatically. He began standing on his own, first for just a few seconds at a time, then for minutes, then for extended periods. His legs, though still weak, grew stronger with each passing day, supported by Miguel's continued massage and physical therapy. On the 20th day, Titan took his first steps. The entire household had gathered in the stable, word having spread that something momentous was about to happen. Don Ricardo stood at the front of the crowd, his hands clasped tightly together, hardly daring to breathe. Miguel stood beside Titan, one small hand resting on the horse's shoulder, offering support and encouragement. And Titan, the magnificent giant who had once seemed destined to die in that very stable, lifted one enormous hoof and placed it forward, then another and another. The cheers that erupted were deafening. Workers who had been skeptical of Miguel from the beginning now shouted his name with joy and gratitude. Women from the kitchen staff wiped tears from their eyes. Even the stern-faced guards who patrolled the hacienda's gates allowed themselves to smile. Don Ricardo rushed forward and embraced Miguel, lifting the small boy off the ground in a display of emotion that shocked everyone who knew the normally reserved Millionaire. "You did it!" Don Ricardo exclaimed, his voice breaking with emotion. "You actually did it. My boy, you have given me back my dearest friend. I can never repay you for this gift." Miguel, embarrassed by the attention but unable to suppress his own joy, simply pointed at Titan. "It was not me alone," he said. "Titan did the hardest work. He never gave up, even when everything seemed hopeless. I just helped him find his strength again." The celebration continued throughout the day. Don Ricardo ordered a feast to be prepared for all the workers, and for the first time in weeks, laughter and music filled the hacienda. But Miguel did not participate in the festivities for long. He slipped away from the crowd and returned to the stable, where Titan stood in his stall, looking stronger and more alive than anyone had dared to hope. The boy approached the horse and pressed his forehead against Titan's neck, closing his eyes and letting out a long breath he had not realized he had been holding. They stood together in comfortable silence, two souls who had walked through darkness and emerged into light. Outside, the sounds of celebration drifted through the evening air, but inside the stable, there was only peace. "We still have work to do," Miguel whispered. "You are not fully healed yet, but you will be. I promise you, you will be." Titan lowered his massive head and gently nuzzled the boy's hair, a gesture of affection and trust that needed no translation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The weeks that followed were filled with steady progress and growing hope. Titan's recovery, though miraculous in its beginning, required continued dedication and care. Miguel maintained his rigorous schedule of herbal treatments and physical therapy, gradually reducing the frequency of the remedies as the horse's natural strength returned. Each day brought new milestones, new reasons to celebrate. Titan walked farther, stood longer, and ate more heartily. The shadow of death that had hung over him for so long retreated further with each sunrise until it became nothing more than a distant memory. 1 month after Miguel's arrival, Titan walked out of the stable under his own power for the first time. The morning was clear and bright, the sky a perfect blue that seemed to stretch into infinity. Workers lined the path from the stable to the main corral, watching in silent reverence as the giant horse emerged into the sunlight. Titan paused at the threshold, lifting his massive head to feel the warmth of the sun on his face, his nostrils flaring as he breathed in the fresh air he had been denied for so long. Then, with Miguel walking steadily beside him, he stepped forward onto the grass. Don Ricardo stood at the edge of the corral, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. He had dreamed of this moment during the darkest hours, had prayed for it when hope seemed impossible. And now that it was happening, he found himself overwhelmed by emotions he could barely contain. The millionaire who had built an empire through shrewd calculations and cold logic was reduced to a weeping man by the simple sight of his beloved horse walking across the grass. Titan seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He walked with a dignity that befitted his name, his head held high despite the weakness that still lingered in his legs. When he reached the center of the corral, he stopped and turned to look at Miguel, who had released his hold and stepped back to give the horse space. For a long moment, horse and boy regarded each other across the distance, a silent communication passing between them that no one else could fully understand. Then Titan did something that made everyone gasp. He lowered his massive body down onto the grass, folding his legs beneath him in a graceful motion, and then rolled onto his side. For a heart-stopping instant, the workers feared he had collapsed, that the exertion of walking had been too much for him. But then Titan began to roll, his enormous body turning over and over on the soft grass, his legs kicking at the air in an expression of pure joy. He was doing what healthy horses do, what Titan had not done since before his illness began. He was celebrating life. Miguel laughed, a bright, genuine sound that rang across the corral and lifted the spirits of everyone who heard it. The workers began to cheer and applaud, releasing the tension they had carried for weeks. Don Ricardo walked to Miguel's side and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing gently as they watched Titan enjoy his newfound freedom. "You have given me something money cannot buy," Don Ricardo said, his voice thick with emotion. You have given me hope when there was none, and you have saved a life that means more to me than all my wealth combined. I made a promise of $500,000 to whoever could cure Titan, and I intend to keep that promise. But I find myself wanting to give you so much more." Miguel looked up at the millionaire with surprise. The reward had been the reason for his journey, the money that could change his grandmother's life and help them continue their work of healing. But standing here now, watching Titan roll joyfully on the grass, Miguel realized that something had changed within him. The money, while still important, no longer felt like the point of everything he had done. "I am grateful for the reward," Miguel said carefully. "My grandmother and I can do much good with it. But I did not come here for the money alone. I came because something inside me said I was needed, that this was where I was supposed to be. Seeing Titan healthy again is the greatest reward I could ever receive." Don Ricardo studied the boy's face, seeing once again the remarkable depth of character that had impressed him from the very beginning. In all his years of business dealings, he had met countless people motivated by greed, by ambition, by the endless pursuit of more. But here was a child who had traveled hundreds of miles, worked tirelessly for weeks, and saved a life that others had given up on, all because something inside him said it was the right thing to do. The millionaire made a decision in that moment, a decision that had been forming gradually over the past weeks, but which now crystallized into certainty. He would not simply give Miguel the promised reward and send him back to his village. That would be fulfilling the letter of his promise while ignoring its spirit. No, Don Ricardo intended to do something more, something that would honor the extraordinary gift this boy had given him. "Miguel," Don Ricardo said, kneeling down so that he was at eye level with the child, "I have been thinking about your future. You have a gift that I have never seen before, an ability to understand and heal animals that goes beyond anything I thought possible. This gift should not be hidden away in a remote mountain village where only a few can benefit from it. This gift should be nurtured, educated, and shared with the world." Miguel's brow furrowed with confusion. "I do not understand what you mean." "I mean that I want to help you become everything you are capable of becoming," Don Ricardo explained. "I want to pay for your education, send you to the best schools, give you access to resources and opportunities that you could never have otherwise. And when you are ready, if you choose, I want you to return here and continue your work. Hacienda del Sol can become a place of healing, a sanctuary for animals who need the kind of care that only you can provide." The boy stared at the millionaire, his young mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was being offered. He had come here hoping to win a reward that would help his grandmother buy medicine and supplies. Now he was being offered something far greater, a future that he had never dared to imagine. "What about my grandmother?" Miguel asked, his first thought going to the woman who had raised him and taught him everything he knew. "I cannot leave her alone in the village." Don Ricardo smiled, having anticipated this concern. "Your grandmother will come too if she wishes. There is plenty of room here, and I suspect her wisdom would be invaluable. This hacienda has been too empty for too long. It needs people who care about more than just money and status. It needs people like you and her." Miguel stood in the corral, the weight of Don Ricardo's offer pressing upon his young shoulders like something both wonderful and terrifying. He watched Titan rise from the grass, shaking dust from his magnificent coat, and felt the conflicting pulls of loyalty and opportunity tugging at his heart. His grandmother had sacrificed everything to raise him, had given him all the knowledge and love she possessed. The thought of leaving her, even for the chance at a better future, felt like a betrayal of everything she had done. But Don Ricardo had said Elena could come too. The words echoed in Miguel's mind, opening doors he had never known existed. He tried to imagine his grandmother here, in this place of marble and luxury, surrounded by gardens and pastures that stretched beyond sight. Would she be happy? Would she feel lost in a world so different from the simple mountain life she had always known? Or would she embrace the opportunity to share her wisdom with more people, to help more animals, to see her grandson grow into something greater than their small village could ever offer? "I need to ask her," Miguel finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "I cannot make this decision alone. My grandmother raised me. She taught me everything. Whatever we do together." Don Ricardo nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Of course, that is exactly as it should be. I will arrange for transportation to your village. You can speak with your grandmother, explain everything, and if she agrees, bring her back here. Take whatever time you need." And so, 3 days later, Miguel found himself in the back of one of Don Ricardo's trucks, watching the landscape change as they climbed higher into the mountains. The driver, a kind man named Pedro, who had worked for the hacienda for years, navigated the winding roads with practiced ease, occasionally glancing in the mirror to check on his young passenger. Miguel said little during the journey, his mind occupied with thoughts of how to explain to his grandmother everything that had happened. When they finally reached the village, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Miguel's heart swelled at the familiar sight of the adobe houses, the narrow streets, the ancient church with its crumbling bell tower. Children playing in the plaza stopped to stare at the truck, an unusual sight in a place where most people traveled by foot or donkey. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached his grandmother's house, a small crowd had gathered to see what was happening. Elena emerged from the doorway, her weathered face creasing with emotion at the sight of her grandson. She had aged in the weeks he had been gone, worry etching new lines around her eyes and mouth. But when Miguel ran to her and threw his arms around her frail body, the years seemed to fall away. She held him tightly, murmuring prayers of gratitude, tears streaming down her cheeks as she thanked God for bringing him home safely. That evening, sitting by the fire in their small kitchen, Miguel told his grandmother everything. He described Titan's illness and the failed attempts of the veterinarians. He explained how he had diagnosed the problem and prepared the remedies, how he had spent weeks nursing the horse back to health. And finally, with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty, he told her about Don Ricardo's offer, about the education and opportunities that awaited, about the invitation for her to come and share in this new life. Elena listened without interruption, her dark eyes fixed on her grandson's face as he spoke. When he finished, she remained silent for a long moment, staring into the flames as if seeking guidance from the fire itself. Miguel waited anxiously, his stomach tight with anticipation, afraid that she would refuse, that she would choose the familiar comfort of their village over the unknown possibilities of the hacienda. Finally, Elena spoke. "When you left for that place," she said slowly, "I was afraid I would never see you again. I prayed every night for your safety, for your success, but I also prayed for something else. I prayed that whatever happened, you would remain true to yourself, that the world would not change the good heart that beats inside you." She turned to look at him, and Miguel saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before, a pride so deep and pure that it made his own eyes fill with tears. "You have done more than I ever dreamed possible," she continued. "You saved a life that others had abandoned. You showed the world what our ways, our knowledge can accomplish. And now this man offers you a chance to become something greater, to help more creatures than we could ever reach from this small village. How could I refuse such a gift?" Miguel's heart leaped. "You will come with me? You will leave the village?" Elena smiled, a smile tinged with sadness but also with hope. "This village has been my home for 70 years. I know every stone, every tree, every face. Leaving it will not be easy. But a long time ago, when your parents died and you were placed in my arms, I made a promise. I promised to give you everything you needed to become who you were meant to be. If this is part of your path, then it is part of mine as well." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Elena said goodbye to the villagers who had been her friends and neighbors for decades, accepting their tearful farewells and well-wishes with grace and dignity. She gathered her most precious possessions, the herbs and remedies she had collected over a lifetime, the few photographs of Miguel's parents, the hand-carved wooden cross that had hung above her bed since she was a child. Everything else she gave away, knowing that material things meant little compared to the memories she carried in her heart. When the truck departed the village for the final time, Elena sat beside Miguel in the back, her hand clasped tightly in his. She watched the mountains recede into the distance, the only landscape she had ever known growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Ahead lay uncertainty, a world she could barely imagine. But beside her sat her grandson, the boy who had become her whole world, and that was enough. Whatever challenges awaited them at Hacienda del Sol, they would face them together. As the truck descended toward the lowlands, Miguel felt a strange sensation in his chest, a feeling of standing at the threshold of something vast and unknown. His old life was behind him now. His new life was just beginning. The arrival of Miguel and Elena at Hacienda del Sol was met with a reception that neither of them could have anticipated. Don Ricardo had prepared a welcome that reflected the depth of his gratitude, transforming the usually quiet estate into a place of celebration. Banners hung from the main house, flowers decorated every available surface, and the entire household staff had gathered in the courtyard to greet the boy who had saved Titan and the grandmother who had taught him everything he knew. Elena stepped down from the truck with the help of Pedro, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur surrounding her. She had seen photographs of wealthy estates in old magazines, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of standing in one. The marble columns, the manicured gardens, the fountain that sprayed crystal water into the air, all of it seemed like something from a dream. For a moment, she felt small and out of place, a simple mountain woman in a world of unimaginable luxury. But then, Don Ricardo approached, and something in his manner immediately put her at ease. He did not greet her with the condescension she had expected from a man of his wealth. Instead, he took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes with genuine warmth and respect. "Señora Elena," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard so that everyone could hear. "Your grandson has given me back something I thought was lost forever. He has shown me that true wisdom does not come from universities or books, but from the heart and from the land. I am honored to welcome you to my home, and I hope that in time you will come to consider it your home as well." Elena, touched by his sincerity, smiled and squeezed his hands in return. "You have shown great kindness to my grandson. Any man who values life as you do, who would offer a fortune to save a single horse, is a man worthy of respect. We are grateful for your generosity." The celebration continued into the evening with food and music and laughter filling the hacienda in a way it had not experienced in years. But for Miguel, the highlight of the day came when he was finally able to introduce his grandmother to Titan. He led her to the stable where the great horse stood in his stall, his coat gleaming in the lamplight, his eyes bright with health and vitality. Elena approached Titan slowly, her experienced gaze taking in every detail of his condition. She had healed many animals in her life, but she had never seen a creature quite like this one. His size alone was remarkable, but there was something else about him, a nobility of spirit that seemed to radiate from his very being. She understood immediately why Don Ricardo had been willing to pay any price to save him. "You did well, grandson," she said softly, placing her hand on Titan's neck, just as Miguel had done so many times. "The Dormilona is completely gone. His energy flows freely again. You listened to what he needed and gave it to him. That is the essence of healing." Titan, as if recognizing the connection between Elena and Miguel, lowered his great head and gently nuzzled the old woman's shoulder. Elena laughed, a sound of pure delight that made Miguel's heart swell with happiness. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the stable and the presence of those he loved, he felt that everything was exactly as it should be. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery for both Miguel and Elena. Don Ricardo had arranged for them to have their own cottage on the grounds, a comfortable dwelling with a garden where Elena could grow her herbs and remedies. It was smaller than the main house, but far larger and more comfortable than anything they had known in the village. Elena spent her days cultivating plants, teaching the hacienda's workers about natural medicine, and slowly adapting to a life of relative ease after decades of hardship. For Miguel, the transition was both exciting and challenging. Don Ricardo had hired a tutor to begin his formal education, a patient woman named Señora Morales, who quickly recognized the boy's intelligence and hunger for knowledge. Miguel devoured books on animal anatomy, veterinary medicine, and biology, supplementing his grandmother's traditional teachings with modern scientific understanding. He learned to read and write with fluency, discovered mathematics and history, and began to see how his natural gifts could be enhanced by formal training. But Miguel never neglected Titan. Every morning before his lessons and every evening after they concluded, he visited the stable to check on the horse who had changed his life. Titan continued to improve, his strength returning fully as the weeks passed. By the end of the second month, he was running in the pastures again, his massive form thundering across the grass with a power and grace that took everyone's breath away. Watching him, Miguel felt a pride that went beyond words. Don Ricardo often joined Miguel during these visits, standing beside the boy as they watched Titan graze or run. The millionaire had changed in subtle but noticeable ways since Miguel's arrival. He smiled more frequently, engaged more warmly with his workers, and seemed to have rediscovered a capacity for joy that had been dormant since his wife's death. The empty halls of Hacienda del Sol now echoed with life and purpose. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, Don Ricardo made an announcement that surprised everyone. He had decided to transform part of his estate into an animal sanctuary, a place where sick and abandoned creatures could receive care and healing. He wanted Miguel and Elena to oversee this project, to build something that would continue their work long into the future. "I have spent my life accumulating wealth," Don Ricardo explained, his voice reflective. "I built an empire of money and property, but I never stopped to ask what it was all for. You have shown me, Miguel. You have shown me that wealth means nothing if it is not used to help others. This sanctuary will be my legacy, but it will also be yours. Together, we will create something that matters." Miguel looked at his grandmother, who nodded with tears in her eyes. They had come to this place hoping to win a reward, and instead, they had found a purpose, a family, and a home. 5 years passed, and the transformation of Hacienda del Sol was nothing short of extraordinary. What had once been a symbol of one man's wealth had become a beacon of hope for animals throughout the region. The sanctuary that Don Ricardo envisioned had grown beyond anyone's expectations, expanding to include multiple barns, rehabilitation facilities, and acres of pastures where rescued creatures could heal and thrive. Word of the sanctuary spread far and wide, and people traveled from distant provinces to bring animals in need, knowing that at Hacienda del Sol, every life was valued. Miguel, now 15 years old, had grown into a remarkable young man. The scrawny child who had arrived at the gates with dusty clothes and worn sandals had been replaced by a confident teenager who moved through the sanctuary with purpose and grace. His formal education had progressed rapidly under Senora Morales' guidance, and he had already begun correspondence courses with a prestigious veterinary school in the capital. But despite his academic achievements, Miguel never forgot where his true knowledge came from. His grandmother's teachings remained the foundation of everything he did. Elena, though aged by the years, had found a contentment in her new life that she had never known in the mountains. Her cottage had become a gathering place for workers and visitors alike, drawn by her wisdom and her remedies. She spent her mornings tending her herb garden, which had expanded to cover an entire acre of the estate, and her afternoons teaching anyone who wished to learn. Her reputation had grown to match her grandson's, and healers from across the country came to study with her. Titan remained the heart and soul of the sanctuary. The great horse, now in his 20th year, had never fully returned to his former athletic glory, but he had found a different kind of purpose. He had become a symbol of resilience, a living proof that recovery was possible even when all hope seemed lost. Children from nearby schools visited regularly to see him, listening with wonder, as Miguel told the story of how a simple boy from the mountains had saved the life of a magnificent giant. Don Ricardo, watching all of this unfold, often found himself overwhelmed by emotions he could barely contain. The loneliness that had consumed him after his wife's death had been replaced by a sense of belonging and purpose. Miguel had become like a son to him, Elena like a treasured elder whose wisdom he sought in times of uncertainty. The wealth that had once seemed so important now served a greater purpose, funding the sanctuary's operations and providing scholarships for young people who wished to study animal medicine. One morning in late spring, as Miguel walked through the pastures on his daily rounds, he found Don Ricardo standing alone at the fence, watching Titan graze in the distance. The millionaire seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains rose against the blue sky. Miguel approached quietly and stood beside him, following his gaze. "Do you remember the day you arrived here?" Don Ricardo asked without turning around. "I thought you were just another person come to take advantage of my desperation. I almost turned you away at the gate." Miguel smiled at the memory. "I remember being terrified. I had never seen a horse so big or a house so grand. But when I saw Titan lying there, something inside me knew I could help him. I cannot explain it any better than that." Don Ricardo nodded slowly. "That is the thing about true gifts. They cannot be explained, only recognized and honored. You honored your gift that day, Miguel. You trusted something inside yourself that had no logical basis, and because of that trust, everything changed, not just for Titan, but for all of us." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Titan move through the grass with the unhurried grace of an animal at peace. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces and casting long shadows across the land. In the distance, other horses grazed alongside donkeys and mules that had been rescued from neglect. A flock of sheep, brought to the sanctuary after their owner passed away with no one to care for them, dotted a nearby hillside like clouds fallen to earth. "I have been thinking about the future," Don Ricardo continued. "I am not a young man anymore. The doctors tell me my heart is not what it used to be. Someday, perhaps sooner than I would like, I will not be here to oversee all of this. When that day comes, I want you to know that everything I have built, this sanctuary, this estate, all of it, will pass to you." Miguel turned to look at the millionaire, shock evident on his face. "Don Ricardo, I cannot accept such a thing. This is your life's work, your legacy. It should go to your children, your family." Don Ricardo finally met the boy's eyes, and there was a depth of love in his gaze that took Miguel's breath away. "You are my family," he said simply. "You and Elena. You came into my life when I had lost all hope, and you gave me back something I thought was gone forever. Not just Titan, but a reason to live, a purpose beyond accumulating wealth. My children have their own lives, their own fortunes. They do not need what I have built here. But you do, and more importantly, the animals who will come here in the years ahead need you." Tears welled in Miguel's eyes as the magnitude of Don Ricardo's words sank in. He thought of his grandmother, of the journey they had taken from their mountain village, of all the creatures they had helped along the way. He thought of Titan, the magnificent horse whose illness had brought them together, and of all the animals who had found healing at the sanctuary since then. "I will honor this gift," Miguel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will continue your work for as long as I live, and I will pass it on to others who share our vision. This sanctuary will stand as a testament to what is possible when people choose compassion over indifference, when they value life above all else." Don Ricardo placed his hand on Miguel's shoulder and squeezed gently. "That is all I could ever ask." In the pasture, Titan raised his great head and looked toward them, as if sensing the significance of their moment. The morning sun caught his chestnut coat, making it gleam like polished copper, and for an instant, he seemed as magnificent as he had ever been. If you enjoyed this story and it touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with others. Drop a comment below rating this story from 1 to 10, and let me know where you are watching from. If you love stories about the incredible bonds between humans and animals, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another one. Thank you for being here until the end.